Today's lesson is on problem solving with roots. So check out these equations that we're going to have to solve using square roots. All right, here we have 4 different equations, and we are going to solve for the variable. All right, so for the first one, m squared equals 25. So some of you, mental math, all you have to do is figure out what number, when you square it, gives you 25. But if you're not sure, what you do when you solve equations, you use inverse operations. And something to the second power and something square rooted, those are inverses of each other. So we can solve this by, if you square root both sides, square rooting m squared results in m, and then the square root of 25 is 5. 5 squared is 25. Alright, so now, next one, what number squared gives you 361? Alright, well, maybe that one's not mental math. Maybe you don't have that perfect square memorized, so we can solve it. To get x by itself, you square root it, because square rooting a square, it's like they cancel each other out, and it leaves you with x. But whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So the square root of 361 is 19. Now, before I move on to the next two, I want you to think about, well, how do you even know if your answer is right? If you take your answer and plug it back into your variable, check to see if it's right. So, does 5 squared equal 25? Yep. Alright, check this one. 19, plug it back into the original equation. Is 19 squared, does that equal 361? Yes, it does. You can always plug your answer back in to do a quick check. Alright, so now these bottom two equations are a little bit different. They're asking you the square root of what number gives you this answer. So the square root of what number gives you the answer of 12? So maybe you can figure that out mental math, but if not, you solve equations doing inverse operations. So this time we have the square root. To undo a square root, you square it. They cancel each other out and you're left with just a. But whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So 12 squared is 144. Alright, so the next one, what number, when you square root it, gives you the answer of 4? If you're not sure, square both sides, cancels that out, leaves you with x equals 4 squared is 16. But let's check our answers. So take your answer, plug it back into your variable, and see if it works. The square root of 144, what does that equal? It equals 12. Boom, checks. Alright, 16, plug that in. The square root of 16, does that equal 4? Yes, it does. So the cool thing about these is that you can always check your answer. Alright, and now we have 3 different story problems. 3 separate story problems involving perfect squares or perfect cubes, square roots, cube roots. So it says the area of a square boxing ring is 484 feet squared. They're asking what is the length of one side. So if you remember, area of a square is length times width. However, we often, because it's a square, all sides are the same length, so we'll just call it side. So side times side is side squared. So the area is side squared. Let's go back up to the story problem. They gave me this number, and that number was the area. So I'm going to take that number and I'm going to plug it in for A. So 484 equals the side length squared. So if I know the area, I can solve for the side length, solving equations using roots, inverse operations. I need to figure out what just the side length is. So I have to square root this s squared to cancel it out, and whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So the square root of 484 is 22. Alright, so let's figure out, what did I just do? I figured out that this side length is 22, and since it's a square, all side lengths are 22. So we have the area, we just found the length of one side, and then the last question is, what is the perimeter? Well, perimeter means add up all four sides together, or multiply the side length by 4. So in this case, the perimeter, 4 times 22, is 88. And I guess I should get my units on there. 88 feet, and this was 22 feet. Alright, another story problem, but this time we're talking about volume, and we're talking about a perfect cube. So similar to area, we found area doing length times width. Volume is length times width times height. However, if it's a perfect cube, the length, the width, and the height are all the same length. So if you multiply the same number by itself 3 times, the volume is the side length cubed. Alright, so in this example it says the volume is 512. So I can plug that number in for my V of my formula. 512 is equal to side cubed. So now I have to solve this equation. What number, when you cube it, gives you 512? If you don't know the answer off the top of your head, you simply solve it by doing inverse. So in this case, something cubed, to undo it, you must cube root. So I will cube root this side, which will cancel these out and leave me with just my variable s. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So the cube root of 512 is 8. So the side length of this cube is 8 inches. 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. Alright, last story problem involving roots. There's a lot going on in this one, so we kind of got to break it down. So the formula, d equals 16t squared. I'm just going to go ahead and real quick rewrite that. d equals 16t squared. Represents the approximate distance, d. So this d represents distance. In feet, a skydiver falls in t seconds. So this variable represents seconds. Before opening the parachute, it says find the time. So if I have to find the time, I'm going to be solving for t. So find the time a skydiver takes to fall 816 feet, that's distance, before opening the parachute. Alright, so you jump out of an airplane, and we have to figure out, you're going to fall 816 feet. We have to figure out, how much time does that take? Alright, so let's plug in the number given to us into our formula. 816 equals 16 times t squared. So because I have this number in front, it's actually a two-step equation. So using inverse operations, I want to solve for t, so I have to get rid of everything on the right side. So instead of multiplying by 16, to get rid of it, I'll have to divide by 16. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Divide by 16. All right, let's bring down what's left over. On the right side, I still have t squared equals 816 divided by 16 is 51. So what number squared gives me 51? Well, I'm not sure, so let's solve it. I would have to square root to undo and get my variable by itself. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So the square root of 51 is going to give me a decimal, and it's about 7.1. So t equals 7.1, but what did I just figure out? What does t represent? Oh yeah, seconds. So t, 7.1 seconds. It would take 7 seconds to fall 816 feet before the skydiver has to open their parachute. Whew, that was a tough one. So there's your full lesson on problem solving with roots. Good luck.